Go.
There we go. And I believe that we're live. Can folks give an indication in the chat if you can see us okay? Maybe there's no one in the chat currently, but I am seeing the live button at the bottom left. There we go.
People can see us. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey, Gavin. Good to see you, or speak to you, I guess. So today we're going to talk about building the future with Polkadot and how Bison Trails can help support that vision. As many of you know, Polkadot recently launched, and they're currently going through their phased process to fully launch the network to remove pseudo and enable transactions and really get the community and individual members leading the protocol from there. Today with us we have Dieter, Will, Joe, and I'm Victor. I want to give them each a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds to introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into the content. Dieter, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Well, thanks, Joe and Victor, for having this idea and inviting us. I mean, this is great. And so I guess like my role at the foundation is around ecosystem development. So really making sure there's a high quality group of projects that are building on Polkadot's technology, and we kind of build a useful ecosystem that encourages other projects to join. So I've been here for about a year. Prior to that, I was kind of working in the investment world and in a blockchain-focused VC company. But I guess I first got interested in blockchain when I was a cryptography researcher way before that, and have been following the space ever since. So I was really, really excited to get to work with a project like that.
Awesome. Will, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I work at Parity. My role there is the Master of Validators, and that's like an actual title. Basically, my role is to both like work inside and outside the company to cultivate kind of the validator community, help with kind of like education around actually building kind of the technical infrastructure and architectures that people run with these things. And I first kind of got into blockchain and crypto. Initially, like 2013 is when I first started around Bitcoin, but it wasn't really until like Ethereum came around that I kind of took the deep dive. Was working in kind of like the DeFi space in 2017. Then I was working at like a crypto fund later. And it was around that time I heard this term kind of like generalized mining that I think kind of like CoinFund may initially kind of came up with or kind of like made. And I actually first kind of heard like Bison Trails like within almost that same kind of like sphere of what that actually kind of means. And like working at kind of like a fund at the time, I was interested in like, okay, what are ways that you can like deploy capital to actually be pretty interesting, and went down that rabbit hole a lot, and then found kind of like proof of stake networks to actually be pretty interesting there. And so that's kind of currently doing a lot of interesting stuff with the community for validators and whatnot.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Joe.
Hey everyone, I'm Joe Loluz. I'm the CEO of Bison Trails, CEO and co-founder. What an exciting time for Polkadot. What an exciting stake. I'm like super pumped for everything that's going on in the ecosystem and for the work that the foundation and Parity and the Polkadot team have been doing. It's been really cool, and I know it's really exciting on our end. I'm sure it's equally exciting on your all's end, and really excited to dig in more. So I'm this, like I said, I'm the CEO of Bison Trails. We're an infrastructure as a service company, so we help folks that want to participate in blockchain networks do that securely, safely, and easily. What that really means is if you want to run a validator on a network that is proof of stake, like Polkadot, for instance, and you want to do that in the most secure, easiest way possible, you can use the Bison Trails platform to do it. We work with some really great independent folks and some really great companies that all participate in a series of different blockchains, and we support blockchains like Polkadot and then a whole bunch of other proof of stake networks as well.
Yeah, awesome. And my name is Victor. I also work at Bison Trails and shill it on my clothing very frequently. I'm going to be moderating this discussion, but my role at Bison Trails is protocol specialist. It's a job title I made up for myself. I'm the only one. And essentially, I lead up all of our work related to understanding how different protocols work, helping the company figure out which ones we should be supporting, and really empowering the other lines of business within the organization with all the knowledge that they need to excel at their roles. So I want to start us off. I know a lot of the folks probably dialing in here are fairly familiar with Polkadot, but I'd love to take maybe a couple of minutes and hear from Dieter or Will to give us like a little bit of an overview of Polkadot. What you're most excited about, any potential use cases, and things that you'd like to share with the community.
Sure. I mean, maybe I can just start there. I guess I won't spend too much time on what Polkadot is exactly, but essentially it uses a sharded model where, as opposed to like ETH2 where you have homogeneous shards, you have heterogeneous shards. And essentially these are, we call these parachains, and they have a unique customizable transition function. And as long as one of these chains logic can compile to WASM, then it can essentially connect to Polkadot as a parachain, which is really, really powerful and enables like all sorts of super interesting customization. Central to the function of the network, Polkadot has a relay chain, and essentially these parachains will connect to the relay chain, propose blocks that are then kind of validated by the relay chain validators. And this is what gives Polkadot the really nice property of ensuring security for each of the parachains. So, as a parachain, as someone running a parachain, you don't really have to incentivize your own community of validators yourself. I mean, you do a little bit, but that's kind of a different thing. But it's not the same as ensuring your own security, which is a nice property. And then you also have Substrate, which is a tool that allows a developer to kind of more easily build one of these parachains than doing it from scratch. And so I guess when I think about like how one should think about using Polkadot, a company who wants to deploy an application-specific chain from scratch can really, first leverage Substrate to build this kind of specific solution that works for them in a fraction of the time than building it from scratch, and then connect their chain to Polkadot and be able to leverage Polkadot's shared security model. And then also enjoy this really strong notion of which interoperability both to other parachains and to external blockchain networks, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and things like that. Mm-hmm. I can jump into use cases, but Will, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Maybe just touch on kind of like the actual security and how that's derived, like from validators and whatnot. So the way that kind of Polkadot differs from other proof of stake networks is that it uses like nominated proof of stake, which is this consensus algorithm that splits up kind of block production and block finality into two separate processes. And because these are like two separate things, we can guarantee 6-second block times. This would actually probably be less, but that's kind of just what we're targeting at the moment. And as Dieter mentioned, actually deriving the security of the networks and all of the parachains that connect to the relay chain. That's done by this kind of like NPOS process. And that's done by actual like the validators actually participating in consensus there. And how this may differ from other networks is that we have kind of a fixed set of validators that's determined by governance that can increase up or down is kind of governance and people actually want to determine that. And so what we ideally strive for in there is like the end goal is kind of like fair representation of stake. So ideally kind of like all the nodes in the network have like a roughly equal amount of stake and all of them roughly get more or less like the same amount of rewards. And so kind of like that's more or less kind of the paradigm of kind of like how those parachains and like other things that are part of the network actually derive security.
Yeah. I'd actually, I'm glad that you brought that up. On our side, I actually love it if Joe could comment a little bit on, like we're obviously part of your community, right? Like we're one of the validators that has been working very closely with you, that is currently supporting the chain. And we not only have that experience and also our experience with Kusama, but also all the other chains that we've supported and all the different security models that we've seen. Joe, I'd love for you to kind of comment on that and to share what that's like.
Yeah. I think we have Bison Trails, we being Bison Trails, have had tremendous experience over the last pretty close to a year now, I guess, working in a live scenario, starting with Kusama. We're coming up on the year mark, aren't we? Pretty quick for Kusama. So yeah, I mean, we have as a company, we have a ton of experience working with Substrate and working with networks that look a lot like the most recently launched Polkadot network, and it's been pretty exciting. It's been pretty exciting for us so far to sort of see it come into play and come into action. But I think what's really interesting for us as a company is what you're describing, like staying on top of the different security processes and the different consensus algorithms and systems to help secure a network, produce blocks, produce finality, and it's definitely a big challenge for us, and why we're really excited about the work that we do, and why we're a very technical team. Bison Trails is mostly an engineering organization, and that really is a reflection of the seriousness that it takes to run validators across different networks like Kusama and Polkadot and other proof of stake networks that we're running. So yeah, it's fun. It's a challenge. It's definitely an exciting time. Things break, and we're excited to help things break, and we're excited to help fix things too. So I will say, I wonder if some of the engineers on our team would be would say the same thing about Kusama early days, but at least for me, from my vantage point, it's been pretty exciting to see like all the the chaos happen, and how the community has how the community has rallied around building this network out.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought that up. Kusama was definitely like first of its kind effort. This canary net that has real economic conditions that nobody really knew what to do with, but that everybody got behind and got extremely involved in, and is now extremely active not only on the development front but the governance front, and just all kinds of testing. I'd actually love to dig in a little bit more and hear from you guys on what are the key lessons and takeaways that you've learned out of your experience with Kusama, and how are you applying those to the work that you're doing with Polkadot?
Yeah, I guess kind of just from a vantage point of the people that are running nodes. So people that are just pretty new to the space of just running Polkadot nodes, like from now at like the launch of NPOS, there's like a vast difference of the people that have been running on Kusama than people that have been running now. So I'm helping like a lot of different dollars in the ecosystem, and it's pretty clear to see the like seasoned veterans that have been like validating on Kusama for the past few months, and the people that are just kind of like joining more or less now. And so I think kind of like from the perspective of people that have been in the ecosystem, that have been actually participating in running nodes and whatnot, like there's so many lessons learned of like how to actually run nodes, how do you upgrade, how do you ensure kind of like reliability of in case that you want to make like backups of like databases, in case you want to have like failover nodes and those kinds of things. To me, it's like pretty clear in terms of like the people that are going to succeed early on in Polkadot in terms of perhaps like running validators. Like the people that have been in Kusama in that system, I think have been there's a lot of lessons learned from an operational kind of front.
For sure.
I guess just to add to that a bit, like I mean, when we first launching Kusama was like such a learning experience, because you're basically launching this like whole other network. So you have to actually like very holistically think like, what tech needs to be in place, like what's kind of the state of like the protocol itself, and is that ready for launching? And like one of the things we went through was like, as you were getting at, Victor, like a lot of stuff broke. And I mean, we had to fix it. And like the launch process went from this thing that I think we wanted to take like, a couple months to like much more drawn out, right? And so, I mean, this allowed us to really tighten our belts around Polkadot launch, because as you guys are seeing now, this has already started to go like much faster. And I don't think we would have been there with the Kusama launch. And like, not only the launch process, not only like dealing with the validator community, but on a lot of the soft stuff as well. Like, very simply, like how do we keep people informed? And like what should our support look like? This wasn't fully fleshed out when we launched Kusama, like almost very purposefully. because we wanted to really see what we needed before, like by launching something before moving on to Polkadot. And so we've just gotten better because we went through this like horribly painful, long, but amazing process one time already.
Yeah, I guess kind of from your perspective, from like Joe and Victor, like what was Kusama like from first kind of like looking at that and kind of running nodes and kind of being a part of that, I guess.
I think I'll take this one. I think it's been really, really interesting. It was really, really interesting really early on, like you said, because lots of things were broken. And while I think as a company, we were very excited to learn alongside you. I truthfully, I also I have a puppy. Quit that. I think we were really excited to learn alongside you all. And so, when we found out about Kusama and the concept behind Kusama, we were really excited as a company because this idea of a chaos network, this idea where things are meant to break, and this idea where, things are sort of fuzzy and unclear, helps us get better at professionalizing our systems and helps us get better at creating redundancy and creating geographic distribution and creating the infrastructure systems in place to help secure a network at scale that has real life incongruencies, that has real life, inconsistencies. And so it was very exciting for us from the beginning. And then, obviously delving deep into it, we put a lot of time and effort into building and operating nodes and validators on the Kusama network in a way that was a reflection of our capability. And that was that I'm actually super, super proud. And we've, not to plug too much of our blog, but we've written about it a couple times in different ways, like our performance on Kusama and how we've done and why we're excited about Polkadot and running on Polkadot, because it really is a reflection of the the infrastructure maturity and security that we put in place, even in a network like Kusama Chaos Network. And to be entirely fair, like Will, like as a team, as a company, we are kind of some of those sort of seasoned vets in the validator space. Like we've been running nodes on a whole bunch of proof of stake networks for quite some time now, including, I guess, like Cosmos Game of Stakes might have been like one of the first incentivized test nets, if I remember correctly. But and we were involved in a lot of those as well. And so I will say, like, Kusama felt pretty different. It felt pretty different from that, and yeah, we learned a lot alongside the Polkadot team. It'd be really fun one day to like actually sit down and compare notes.
Yeah.
Just to quickly add to that, I mean, we talk a lot about like Kusama and this function as this like experimental network where we kind of used it to harden Polkadot, but it's actually like it's grown into much more than that. And I mean, what we're seeing now is that like it's developing its own distinct use cases, and we have teams that like want to have these dual deployments on Kusama and then on Polkadot so that they can like constantly harden their Polkadot deployments. And even more than that, we're seeing teams that also like just want to deploy to Kusama, so they can kind of iterate. Like these are generally like earlier stage teams who want to iterate on their product faster and things like that. So to us, it's really interesting that we have seen this evolution from like this experimental test bed to something that is much more of kind of a defined cousin to Polkadot in a lot of ways. And it's because of support from validators like you guys that's been possible.
Yeah. Well, so I'd love to all great points. I think for me, learning about Kusama, learning about Polkadot is a continuing journey, just because they both grow so quickly. So it's still very exciting to work on both of them. Something I want to like maybe backtrack to a little bit was like some really great points that you folks made earlier around, if you look at some of the design choices around Polkadot and like the community, it's like the use of substrate, the use of parachains, the just immense, having two networks, both Kusama and Polkadot, just all of those things in tandem require an immense amount of investment into infrastructure and into people that like know how to run substrate-based chains like really well, will know how to run parachains really well, will know how to transition to collators, and be able to create all the different pieces of tooling that are able to support all these different networks. That is very different from most other chains that we look at, where you'll have one set of nodes that's really like running all the things, and things will be built on top of it, and you don't really need anything extra. I'd love to just dive into that a little bit and get everybody's perspective on, how you're seeing that impact, the way that you guys interact with your validator communities, the way that you interact with infrastructure provider and tooling providers, and how you think about, supporting these individuals and really building out this capability that, that is so required for you to be successful.
Yeah, I guess to speak on that a little bit. So like, it's interesting to see right now, there's a lot of different substrate-based chains that are launching kind of almost like independently. And kind of because they're like a bit earlier, they have to kind of cultivate their own kind of validator communities and whatnot until the actual kind of parachain kind of functionality is live and in production. But from the feedback that I'm hearing kind of from the validators that actually are running on those networks, it's incredibly similar to running like a Kusama or Polkadot validator node. And it translates pretty directly just because the code base, it's using pretty much the same code base that is cut from Substrate. Anyone that's building anything that's on Substrate, it's going to be extremely similar in terms of kind of like overall architecture, the infrastructure that they're running, the command line flags, all that is very, very similar in terms of that. And so kind of like for validators or for people with the ecosystem to get familiar with really anything kind of Substrate based, it pretty directly translates to if they want to run on Polkadot, Kusama, or whatnot there.
It's not just validators too, like as you're getting at,
Yeah.
Victor, like on the infrastructure side and on like the tooling side, you have these really, really wonderful economies of scale. So like, when we're, a lot of my job, I mean, to less extent now, is like really making sure that different wallet teams were supporting Polkadot. And once you get a wallet team, say, to support dots, to get them to support like arbitrary substrate tokens and add like functionality around that is not really different, right? So I mean, you get these great economies of scale, and you get kind of business models where like a wallet provider can support one chain, but then at the same time that leads to support of 10 different chains. So these are really, really nice things. And like similarly, infrastructure providers supporting Kusama, I mean, it's the same ask almost, apart from like additional testing and UI and stuff to support Polkadot as well. So I think that's super, super nice.
Joe, you want to chime in?
I actually missed the last minute of this entire conversation because my internet dropped. So I would love to chime in. However, I'm unaware of what was just said, so I don't want to say anything that doesn't make any sense.
It's okay. I do think that the contribution you have here will be particularly valuable, so I'll repeat it a little bit because I think it's important. What we're just talking about is, if you look at the Polkadot ecosystem, and you have Substrate and parachains and NPOS and all this like tooling, it requires an immense amount of investment, know-how, and resourcing around infrastructure, around validators, around like building up the right skill sets and knowledge in order to support all of that, which is like very different from most other chains where everything's just built kind of like on the same thing, on the same chain, all the same stuff. And Will and Dieter kind of shared their experience around what adding that support looks like and how it's been from their perspective. And I think that also like directly impacts us because we're running substrate-based chains, like we have a bunch of experience with it. So I'd love to kind of hear from you around how that experience of like design choices and these like requirements for infrastructure are impacting us and what we're doing about it.
Got it. For repeating and summarizing, and again, sorry for my remote bad internet. Yeah, that makes it makes a lot of sense, and I think one of the things that is really exciting for me in particular, and for Bison Trails about Polkadot, is it aligns really well with our vision of the future for blockchain networks. And part of what we've been doing as an infrastructure platform is creating these genericized infrastructure concepts using code to make it way easier to deploy validation and security across a bunch of different chains in a seamless way. And so we can actually support folks that want to run parachains using the security and infrastructure model that we are, if you want to run the relay chain, or if you want to run main validators in a really seamless and easy way. And this is all obviously in service of some of the work that you all have been doing with like Substrate and with the Polkadot network. So I'm a firm believer that there's going to be lots of different chains in different ways that support different use cases. And you highlighted, I did catch this bit. You highlighted how Kusama has been even developing or designing its own use cases. And I'm incredibly excited to see a world where there's lots of different parachains that have different use case types, different use case styles, that have different sort of tweaked requirements around the chain itself, and Bison Trails can help support those in a way that be really, really hard if you were doing everything manually. So I'm pumped, and if you can't tell, I'm super pumped about this, and I think that future of many parachains is going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah. I was also thinking about something else. And Dieter, you touched on the ease with which using Substrate makes it like really possible and really simple for wallets and other providers to add support for a broader range of assets and chains. You weren't. I would actually love to dig into your experience dogfooding Substrate in the creation of Kusama and Polkadot. Not only like what that's been like for you, but also just like how that impacted your strategy around like developing Substrate. And then lastly, I'd also love to hear about Substrate 2.0, or like what's the vision, like what is Substrate going to be, and how is that going to impact both Polkadot and the people that are using Substrate.
Yeah, so I think I think it, like dogfooding it with both Kusama and Polkadot, like obviously led to a lot of learnings, right? Because you realize like all the kinks early, and you can kind of correct these things before you actually invite like people building their own parachains to build on this. I mean, obviously it's like not that linear, because like Substrate is out like when you're building Kusama and Polkadot, and like you have this constant like feedback loop, which is good, right? Because you kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. But it just teaches you the pain points, it teaches you the documentation you need to provide, and you just you're able to scale up in terms of how to support people building like much easier. I think like in terms of where Substrate goes, I think you build out palettes, or what used to be called modules, and you just make it much easier to customize, right? And like when I say like the big advantage of Substrate, right, just stepping back, is that someone can come in and build their own customized blockchain, hopefully without like reinventing the wheel. I mean, like the simplest, it's a couple of simple examples. Like if you want to have smart contract functionality, you can just implement the contracts module instead of kind of building that from scratch. Same with like account balances and things like that. Now, we just want to expand that, where instead of just having, I forget the number of modules now, but like dozens of modules where you can kind of implement these customized features, we want to make that much bigger. And, there's a couple things, and like interesting things in the works would be like a palette that implements like IPFS, for example, and things like that. And then we just want to keep doing that. And we don't really, always, I think like people will have to do a certain amount of customization past these palettes, but we just want to make it as easy as possible for people not to have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess kind of
that will continue to evolve. Yeah.
I guess kind of another example that kind of is a part of that is part of the governance, like the whole kind of organization of governance in Polkadot and Kusama is this kind of like tricameral system. So you have this council, you have this kind of technical committee, and these are actually, both of those are made from the same kind of module that people use. And so it's kind of like two just different kind of like instances of the same module used for these two different kind of like governance processes, where so you don't have to rewrite that too much twice even. It's just kind of like re-implementing the same things as kind of just Lego pieces and plugging things in where you need to. That makes it just pretty easy to build these systems where kind of like can create pretty complex governance things if you want to, pretty complex app-specific chains, just composing all these different modules that we and other people create, which I think is pretty exciting.
Mm. And then you mentioned you and other people. Are there community-made modules that you guys are huge fans of?
So like for the stuff that we typically run with like Polkadot and Kusama, I don't really think there's any that external people have made. I mean, there's definitely people that are working on parachains that they contribute to the ones that we make. But I know there's some pretty interesting ones that like Akala and Plasm and kind of a bunch of other people that are making kind of independently that we are.
Got it.
So just to add to that, like, so as you guys may know, we do have this like grants program, and the idea of the grants program is that we want to support like open source development, complementary to Polkadot, Kusama, et cetera. But like a lot of these parachain teams, come to the grants program because they want some funding to develop their parachain. And like, Akala, Plasm have all done this. And, invariably it'll be phrased as we want to build this specific palette that we want to implement. Not invariably, but one way it's phrased is we want to build this specific palette to implement on our parachain. And the way we look at that is like, yeah, we'll support that if it on a standalone basis is like potentially useful for other teams. And so from that, we encourage like a lot of community development of these useful modules. Like Will was saying, there's very few, if maybe none, that we actually like implement for Polkadot and Kusama. But I mean, Akala, basically built their stable coin on one of these palettes. But, the implementation is generic enough that, if another team wanted to build kind of a relatively like basic stablecoin, and basic in a good way, that it's not like super customized in a way that it can't be changed for some other use case, then there's already the beginnings of that there in a very generic way.
Got it. I'd actually love to dive into that a little bit. In that, when we, and this is my perspective, but when I typically look at chains that have been around for extended periods of time, such as Ethereum, where folks have spent the time building tooling and libraries and like all these different things that make developers' lives like really easy. That tends to be something that people are excited about. It's something that people take advantage of when choosing which chain to build on. I'd actually love to hear about how you're approaching that aspect of community building and tooling and really enabling and empowering the people that are either building parachains or building infrastructure or building whatever it is, to take advantage of that and to build up that, I guess, like capability that it empowers these people.
I guess like very broadly, like one way like we look at this is like you have to step back a bit and be like, what do I want out of Polkadot, right? Basically, right now you want this platform where you can easily use it for dApp development across like many different verticals. And then so like from that, we basically defined like what very broadly we want the Polkadot stack to, like tech stack to look like. We have like a few different layers on there. Like right at the bottom, you have your primitives like WASM, cryptographic primitives, signature schemes. Then you have Polkadot. Then you have like second layer protocols. And then you have parachains, second layer protocols, like tooling and languages. And then we've really defined like what each of these layers are, the important components, according to us, in each of these layers, and have basically said that like we want probably a few solutions for each of these components in each of these layers. And then like the broad goal of the grants program is to build that out. And we're still early days in that, but the idea is that like Polkadot with all of these components should be like a good platform for dApp development and really empower developers to build these applications. And some of these some of these components, like for example, like the parachain layer, we've defined like 24 parachain types that we really want, which really come down to like 24 palette types that we really want, that we think are critical for dApp development. And then in the Explorer and wallet layer, we have 10 wallets 10 types of wallets that we really think are important to enable dApp development. I can search for a link here and kind of drop that into the bucket.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Is that helpful, Victor? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, super helpful. I find this stuff fascinating. Joe, you look like you have a comment.
I actually had a follow-up question for Dieter on this. Like, how are you all finding the teams that are helping build out these palettes? By the way, I love the name. I think it's very cool. It was the first time I recognized it. You've been renamed Bundles Palette. Very cool. How are you finding these teams to build out these different pieces, and also and also for folks that want that are excited about building out some of these pieces of the infrastructure stack or the the tech stack within Polkadot, like where can people go to find out more about those things?
Yeah, I mean, very simply, to answer your last question first, I just dropped the link to that tech stack like in the chat. So that literally lays everything out in a lot of detail, talks about the existing projects, and talks about projects that we really want kind of at each component. So it's a great guide, like if you want to contribute to look at that. In terms of finding the teams, that's a big challenge, obviously. So I mean, first off, like there's kind of a two-pronged approach there, right? So one prong is to really think of like looking at these components. Like, I mean, for example, if you look at like the chains component, and let me just maybe get a real example here, and you think of like, we want like good privacy solutions, like good computational privacy solutions, like say for both like exchanging of value and also for like performing computations. Well, then it's like, okay, like what are the teams in the ecosystem out there that are good at that? And we actually like think of that, like break it down that way. It's like, well, there's probably like half a dozen to a dozen teams there. Then you go out to each of those teams and you're like, hey, like what do you guys do? Like, what does your solution look like? How do you think about like moving cross chain? And you do two things there. You get them thinking about Polkadot, and then you also figure out what their solution looks like. And once you have like a bunch of those and have covered the ecosystem, which like thank God the ecosystem's not huge yet, and so you can do that. Then you probably can make some value judgments about like what you think the best solution is in that particular component. And then you can, either target one of those teams to build it, or you can maybe expand the search a bit to other teams that you may not have thought of that you think are skilled enough to do that. The trickiest part of that is not actually finding like the teams that are skilled enough to build out the technical components, but teams that are like, one, able to do that, and then two, are really interested in being in the community long term, and not only building these components once and just like, see you bye, but like want to build a business around these components and, see the strategic value in staying in the ecosystem.
Yeah, really, really great points. I think that's something that a lot of protocols have to work with around, how do you build a kind of like sustainable community. One of the things that has become like apparent to us, I guess, because we work with so many different protocols and we're part of so many different communities, and we kind of get this like perspective of being able to compare and contrast and like see what folks are like. I'd actually be super curious to hear like, what is your vision for the type of community, the type of culture that you'd like to cultivate? Like what are its defining characteristics? What do you want to encourage, or like what are some things that you really want to avoid?
Right. I think it's a good question. I think at the end of the day, like we have this vision of like technically what Polkadot should be able to accomplish, right? But we have to balance like our vision with basically what people building on Polkadot want, and ultimately like what the community wants to strive for, and like what where that goes, and where you kind of see like the sticking points of different ecosystems start to evolve. We don't want to be too prescriptive. Like, there's certain things that we think we need, like bridges, like a stable coin as kind of this basis for DeFi. But, when we start getting into kind of higher level components, then, we really want that to kind of happen naturally. And the reason for that is, like, I think, if it doesn't happen naturally to some extent, then there's not as much staying power, right? So in terms of culture, like, we want a culture of people actively caring about Polkadot and actively wanting to build their own culture, almost, right? Or else, like, if you don't achieve that at some point, and like, it probably will take many years to achieve this, of us like really trying to like steward specific things, but then you'll never have something that exists in and of itself.
Yeah, I guess one thing that I want to add on to that is I think we try and empower people to be very self-sovereign in terms of what they actually want to build and kind of like what that design space looks like. And at least kind of like when I first kind of came into this ecosystem, I was pretty impressed with like just the amount of things that I hadn't really seen elsewhere, like particularly around kind of like the privacy and like the computation layers of the things that some people are working on around that. I think kind of like giving people like frameworks, kind of like substrate to be able to build and flesh out kind of their own visions and ideas of what kind of like this Web3 kind of vision looks like. I think like that to me has been pretty exciting to see people, to give people the tools to be able to do that, and also have them have this like very just wide design space to be able to actually create those things.
Yeah, and when you think about it, like, the whole idea of substrate is that like we shouldn't be prescriptive, right? It's like we should give you like this menu of tooling, and you should build whatever you want, and like we should enable you to realize your vision, as opposed to really kind of driving a specific vision for you.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. And Joe, I'd love to, if you have anything to add here, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I actually, so I know that we Bison Trails is a member of the Polkadot community as a whole. I mean, we participate in things like validation. We participate in things like governance conversations, and so we're always trying to learn from the community itself what we can be doing better, how we can improve our participation in the network. And I guess, like, Will, I kind of wanted to dig. I was really curious about your opinion on kind of Victor's question around culture and sort of what the ecosystem looks like, but specifically from the master validator sort of perspective, like, how do you envision like the validation ecosystem around Polkadot? We're basically brand new. Okay, we'll take Kusama and like put it aside. Like, it's not really brand new, but generally speaking, brand new. Like, what kind of culture do you want to build within like the validator ecosystem? And honestly, what are ways that folks, including ourselves, can be better and help foster that culture and that experience?
Yeah, I think kind of like some values and some aspects that we want to try and cultivate there is like a pretty like fair distribution of things. And so if you kind of look at other networks, the people that run nodes, the people that kind of like have a lot of power in those networks, it's kind of like congregated to a very like small amount of individuals. So it's like, look at Bitcoin, there's only like a few kind of mining pools and that kind of thing. Ideally, with kind of like this whole nominated proof of stake type of paradigm that we use for consensus, the way that kind of people that provide security to the network, it kind of lowers the barrier of entry in a lot of ways, just because like you don't need to be in this like crazy top amount of total amount of tokens to be able to be participate in the ecosystem, and also just because these things are very much kind of like configurable by governance. These things are very much driven by the community and the people that are actively kind of like that want to see changes happen. Like anyone could propose a change in the parameters of how these things work. So, for example, in Polkadot, the number of validators that are currently in the active validator set, this is a number that is configurable by governance. And for Kusama so far, like the past like 10 increases in that have all been community members actually kind of increasing that. And so I think kind of like one thing that like we and like I would like to see is a lot more kind of people being active in the community, not just kind of like in terms of like running nodes, but active in terms of seeing like what's the actual kind of like best way for these ecosystems to work. Because like these things, because it's very like governance focused, it's very much anyone could like change things if they don't really like it, or if they don't kind of if they see a better way to like do things. And so to me, that's pretty exciting to see the different kind of participants in the ecosystem care about kind of like one thing or another, and those are kind of some of the aspects that I think are useful.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Sorry, Victor. I didn't mean to take over the process of asking questions, but I was, personally like really excited to hear about this, specifically from Will, and I'm sure lots of other folks are too. And I mean, we as a company are, heavily focused on helping build a bigger and broader set of validators across Polkadot, as well as all of these teams that are building parachains to help them and their token holders run validators safely and securely on all these networks. So, for us, it's like actually really important question to help, understand our position and help us understand how we can be, better community members.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have the pleasure of working with Will on what feels like an almost daily basis at this point. So I have like a front row seat to it. And Will is like amazing. He's great.
That's awesome.
We're kind of running up on time a little bit. I did want to cover maybe one more topic and then leave a couple of minutes for questions. And feels like I almost have to ask this topic. There's always talk around, cooperation versus competition, or versus like competition fully between all the different chains. And a lot of people talk about, Polkadot versus ETH2 as these kind of like, competing visions for what the ecosystem will look like. I don't want to ask a very specific question, and I don't want to like direct the conversation too much. I would just love to hear, how you guys view like Polkadot versus ETH2 in the whichever way you'd like to frame your answer.
I can jump in there first. I think like I alluded to this like very early when I was talking about like the heterogeneous shards in Polkadot, and the way I think about like how the vision compares to what Polkadot's building is ETH2 is basically uses the system of homogeneous shards, right? Which I think is can be super powerful for for a lot of like the applications and community on there. But I think, when I look to like the use cases that Polkadot will enable, it's these applications that really want to customize their own environment and really want to customize what these shards are and the type of transactions that will kind of best work on them. And I think like, how will we work with ETH2 going forward and like Ethereum in general? I mean, we want to be the blockchain that connects all blockchains, like a lot of other blockchains as well. But so we think that like the community on ETH2 or on Ethereum is like it's unrivaled, right? And that's not going to go away. But we definitely want to use Polkadot as an opportunity for these applications to kind of expand and be able to kind of go cross chain and build their solutions so they can get a different community of users.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I would say kind of Polkadot is a good bet against like blockchain maximalism, where people are like, yeah, very much about Bitcoin or one thing or another. I think these things are all like things do things pretty well in their own kind of like isolated environments, but I would say they work a lot better kind of like together in this kind of like interoperable type of future. And so like to me, I don't really see these things as kind of like competition, but more as just like cool things that would be good to connect to and add on to in the future, just because like these are just the entire like crypto ecosystem. If you just kind of combine it all into like one thing, it kind of creates this very cool vision of like Web3. And I think like everyone has the same kind of values of how they approach the space of trying to create this kind of like trustless future of the internet architecture and that kind of stuff. And so I'd say it's all pretty complementary in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I love that idea, and I think that as a protocol or blockchain agnostic company, we're heavily in support of that concept, and that we also aren't maximalists of any specific chain either. And the thing that's undeniable in the ecosystem in the last couple of years is the pace of innovation. Whether it's ETH2 or it's Polkadot or it's any other chain that's been being built, the types of things that are happening and the pace at which that's happening is astronomical. It's unreal. So we believe in a interoperable trustless future as well. Really excited.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I know we're kind of pushing up. I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions. I know some folks asked 2 questions and asked a question, and then there's another one in the chat. Maybe we'll do the Q&A. Looks like it's mostly directed at Joe for the first one, AWS versus Bison Trails, and then also for Polkadot and Parity, why solutions like Bison Trails are important to Polkadot.
I can take a stab at the first, like a quick version of the first one. So we are a platform that makes it incredibly easy to deploy and manage validation across a number of different chains, including Polkadot. And so if you want to run secure, if you want to run your own secure validators on Polkadot, you can use the Bison Trails platform to do that. We make it way, way, way easier to do. We make it safer to do than if you were necessarily doing it yourself on AWS. Not that it's impossible to do yourself or anything like that, but we've built systems to help secure it and help do things like cloud independence and easily move resources between areas where you can do validation and block production. You can reach out to us, hi@bisontrails.co, and we can tell you more about it.
Yeah, and then I guess to touch on this kind of second question here of why it's important for the Polkadot ecosystem. And so there's a lot of different varieties of people that own dots, that own KSM, that are part of kind of the overall community. And not all of them want to run their own validator per se, just because it's a pretty time-intensive thing. Just because like the amount of skills that you would need in terms of like DevOps infrastructure and that kind of stuff is not everyone has that in and of itself. And even if you are kind of pretty skilled at being a DevOps engineer in like the infrastructure side, keeping up with the pace of things that Kusama and Polkadot kind of put out is a bit challenging. Just being aware of kind of like all the things, all the new updates that come out, new paradigms of how to run nodes, that kind of stuff, it can be a full-time job. And so if you don't want to run your nodes yourself, if you don't want to be on PagerDuty like 24/7 for your own stuff, like there's a lot of good places to do that, like Bison Trails. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Mustafa. And then we had another question in the chat from Brahma Sen. Could you please expand on the idea of privacy and computational solution that can be done with Polkadot?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when I think of like the different types of privacy solutions we want for Polkadot, I think there's a few specific things. Like we want a chain where people can exchange different tokens in the ecosystem privately. And so what I mean by privately, I mean anonymous transactions and confidentiality around transaction sizes. There's not a solution. There is a solution here that exists. It solves this partially, and it's called Zero Chain, and it was built by the Layer X team. But we also kind of want multiple solutions in this, I think, as well. So we're trying to find a team to actually like build kind of like a Zcash like implementation would be awesome. There's also, on the other side of that, we want like privacy for computations. And like the easiest way to do this right now is with SGX technology. It has its problems, but we have a couple solutions that are building in the ecosystem that accomplish this. So one is Substrate T, like Substrate TEE, which it's great, yeah, which does this. And then we have Phala, which also has kind of similar functionality as well. Ultimately, too, we want a platform where you can have this like private computation that doesn't leverage trusted enclaves as well. That's a much harder problem, though, and you'll probably have to like chip that off bit by bit.
Yeah, for sure. Lots of folks are trying to solve it. So if anybody on the line is interested in giving it a shot, please reach out to the Parity or Polkadot team. They'll be happy to talk to you. And also, I'm just going to go ahead and publish this or like drop this. Oh, Will's one step ahead of me. Okay, great. I was just about to put a link.
Ahead of me too, yeah.
Okay, we're right about up on time. I did want to say thank you guys so very much for taking the time to tell us about Polkadot, tell us about the vision, the tooling, the infrastructure, the role that companies like Bison Trails play in enabling really like this future of what Polkadot can bring to the table. It's been a really great discussion for me. I'd love to hear any final closing thoughts, and then if there's no additional questions, then I think that we can wrap up.
Yeah, I guess just like one thing to add, I would say is kind of right now we're kind of towards the end of this launch process for Polkadot, and so things actually still haven't necessarily fully started yet. This is more or less just the beginning, and so there's a lot of opportunities to be a part of the ecosystem in terms of building things, running nodes, all that good stuff. And so yeah, I would say thank you guys for joining here. And
yeah, I guess for me, like the most interesting thing on the horizon is the addition of parachains. Don't have a great timeline for that, but it'll be relatively soon, and we'll be, that's when we'll be seeing kind of these substrate-based chains actually come to life, basically, and interact with each other. And then I think you'll see like the vision of an application change to something built on one chain, or from something built on one chain to something built like across many different chains. And then when we mix that with bridges to Polkadot and Bitcoin, to Ethereum and Bitcoin, we could see some really cool stuff that we just haven't seen yet. And so that's what I'm excited about.
I just want to say thanks to Victor for moderating and hosting and driving the conversation forward, and to both Will and Dieter for participating in this super fun. And then I would say, from an outsider's perspective, generally speaking, on Polkadot, don't give up. Keep doing what you all are doing. It's really, really cool to see the work that's happening and the community that's being built, and to be a part of it and to participate in it. And couldn't agree more. This is step zero, so to speak. So we're excited to be along for the ride the whole way through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Thank you everybody for joining, and have a lovely day.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
cheers.
Bye.
Bye.